Nick, thanks for allowing us to come down and enter into your dad's office and get your story. First question, what's it like? You're sitting in your dad's chair and you look at all these great photographs of bonefish and, tarpon and swordfish. An amazing life that your dad had. You're almost 40 years old. You had an incredible life, here in the Isla Morada, growing up in the Keys.
Yeah.
What's it feel like to be sitting in this room?
The last 20 years passed by really quick, but had a lot of good memories. If I didn't fish with my dad growing up, my uncle, my family, I don't know what I would have done in this life. Fishing was life, and it's all we ever did. That's how we made our living, still make our living, and it's part of our culture and what we do.
Yeah. What are your first memories of fishing?
He sends me a picture with a little yellowtail snapper about 3 inches long once in a while that I probably caught when I was 2 or 3 years old, but I probably wouldn't remember much that young, but fishing off the dock as a kid, 6, 8, 10 years old, catching snappers, grunts, parrotfish, doing that a lot, whether it was after school, on the weekends, and then getting older, going out with my friends, with my dad, my uncle on the boat fishing. But a lot of time was spent off the docks fishing as a kid at Chica Lodge at the hotel there,
Right.
As well. So a lot of shoreline fishing to start.
And how much older is your brother?
He's 40. I'm 38, so he's 41. So he's about 3 years older.
Were you guys competitive growing up?
We probably were till he was about 12 or 14, and then he kind of took a hiatus from fishing. Where I remember the day we were actually fishing, and he'd hooked a big permit with my dad and me, and I think one of my brother's friends, and he fought this big permit for probably 45 minutes or an hour on a 10-pound bonefish rod, and his knot came untied. And I don't remember if that's why he really stopped fishing or not, but I think my dad yelled and screamed a lot after that happened. We came back with the curlicues, and he didn't fish as much then, but I fished my whole life. My brother got into fishing, the last 12, 15 years a lot more, but I would say between, ages of, say, 13 and 23, he didn't fish as much, and I fished all the time. So,
Did you always want to be a fishing guide? Like take after your father? Or did you fall into that a little bit and dabble into it before you wanted to really pursue it?
I probably always wanted to fish to make a living.
Right.
I know when I was really young, I wanted to have a fishing TV show, and then wound up going to college. And I worked on the weekends a lot as a maid on the boats, and got my captain's license when I was 18. And I probably saw myself eventually being a fisherman, fishing captain, running charters. But when I went to college, I wasn't positive what I was going to do. I went there, and it was going to be...
Yeah. What was your favorite TV show? Did you have any favorites? Was it Jose or Flip or?
Yeah, Walker's Cay Chronicles and Jose's, some of the other ones, and wound up being a guest on quite a few shows as a young kid. Because my dad would take the people fishing, or my uncle on the Catch-22, Scott. So I kind of got to watch and see some of it, and just like the idea of filming it and sharing your experience with other people. So,
Your dad was a big fan of bonefish. I think he still is, calling it his favorite fish.
Sure.
Do you have that kind of connection with bonefish and the flat stuff, or did you just go right to the offshore?
So we fished for a little bit of everything here. I would say the Met tournament, which is the Miami Met tournament years ago, was really popular. Bonefish were one of the fish in there, so we would target them in that. And I remember 2 different years catching 12-pound, 2-ounce fish, which were very big. On the internet, you could call that 14, 15 pounds, get away with it. But, over 12 pounds,
Sure.
So those were big. And I enjoyed it, but my passion, I think, was always the blue water, the offshore side with my uncle Scott, my dad. But I enjoyed still catching, whether it was bonefish or tarpon with my dad. We used to go back in the Everglades and catch a lot of redfish and trout. And a lot of weekends I'd fish 2 days, Saturday and Sunday. Saturday I'd be back with my dad inshore fishing. And then Sunday was always on the Catch-22 with my uncle, Scott, who ran the boat. My dad owned it. And that would be, whether we were refishing for snapper and grouper or sailfish or going offshore for dolphin or tuna. So it was kind of always 2 days like that. And a lot of days I went on the party boat as well. But I never caught on to the inshore stuff as much as I did the offshore. Just some reason I like the blue water better.
What was the first fish offshore or on the reef that you loved? Because you couldn't have gone from, right to swordfish.
Yeah. I think that it's probably been you get, personally, me anyhow, an obsession with a different fish, and you kind of almost want to master or catch it, and numbers like, hey, I finally caught it, I can pull back from it. But there was a point where I loved chasing sailfish. I got a little burnout on that where I didn't really enjoy it as much, I would say. Whether it was dropping on a wreck, say for mutton snapper or grouper, I enjoyed doing that for a few years. But then I would kind of switch and do something different.
Mm-hmm.
I would have met the marathon hump, the West Hump, we call it. A lot of memories going there with my dad and my uncle on the Catch-22. And we'd go dolphin fishing all day. And then at sunset, you'd have 500 pilchers left over, go to the hump for the afternoon tuna bite, and to catch 10, 12, 15 big blackfins up to 30 pounds. And they'd be blowing up, jumping out of the water left and right. Being, a 10, 12, 14-year-old kid fighting a 25-pound blackfin on a 20-pound spinner, they're a good fight.
Right.
They pull hard. And back in those days, you could sell the fish. So my uncle would always sell the fish, and him and the mate would make a few extra bucks selling them. But, I'd always remember losing it, and it was like, oh, you cost me $50 or something like that, because you'd lose a big one. But I had, a few years, I'd say I would love one species of fish and want to do that all the time and then kind of mix it up. And one thing about it here in Alamorada, we have different seasons, wintertime on the reef, sailfish, kingfish, groupers. Summer, springtime, the big blackfin showing up, the big mahi start showing up. And then, late summer and all that, little mix of everything. So I think that's one nice thing here. We get to mix it up and go for different species.
Sure. Before we get to the swordfish stuff, I want to go backwards just a little bit. You said your dad was screaming at your brother when you broke that permit off. Was your dad, did he push you pretty hard when you were younger?
Yeah, we always loved to fish and do all that, but no doubt he would get very excited. Him and my uncle. And
does that mean he would scream or?
Yeah, I would just say scream. Yeah, you could just say scream.
At you or with you?
Both. So I remember, say blue marlin fishing we'd go to the Bahamas in the summertime, when we were 14 to 21 years old. Over about 7 years, we'd go to the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos and pitch baiting a blue marlin. I missed a lot of blue marlin. I'd catch some, but I lost so many.
How would you miss them?
When I was 14, I remember that was like our first big trip where we caught, a fair amount, whatever. We caught 12, 13, 14 that trip, I think, or maybe it was 16 or 17, and caught probably 3 out of the 4 bites I would get, maybe 75%. But after that, you'd pitch bait them, this blue marlin would come in on a teaser. You weren't using a circle hook back then. They hadn't really caught on, 20 years ago, whatever it is, 24 years ago now. But, I'd missed him on the pitch bait. One would say, my uncle would be yelling, let him eat it. My dad would be like, whine, come tight on him. You got one guy yelling whine, one guy yelling drop it back. And I can definitely picture them both up there yelling 2 different things, stop, go, left, right. And I'd miss a lot of them, and you fish all day to get one bite, in the summertime. And some days you get 2 or 3 bites, but just come back, pinch you off behind the hook there and all that. I think the circle hooks now is actually easier to catch them, pitching them to them once you get used to them, a higher, catch percentage. But, you get pinched off behind the hook on the ballyhoo and a number of things like that. So, but they would get excited. The screaming was really excitement, with you.
Right.
But not necessarily at you, but no doubt it adds a little extra pressure when you're younger.
When you were fishing with your dad as a kid, would he tell you and was it your job to re-rig and tie all the knots and do everything, or was that kind of his job and he just gave you the rod? Or was he a real teacher and explaining the leaders and knots and everything?
We had a number of teachers. I would say the mates on my uncle's boat were probably always the best teachers and the most influential, because that's who'd be rigging up the rods every time we went fishing. And then I would just take, a spider hitch, the double line. I remember going back, we always fished the same spot for redfish, the same tide back there in the Everglades, and you catch redfish and trout there. But, I always remember I'd always do the double line, a spider hitch, I'd be 10, 12, 14 years old, and put a little piece of 20-pound leader, the same jig on every rod, and we do 3 or 4 on the way out. So I did a lot of the rigging at a young age. But my dad taught me some of it. My uncle did a little bit, but the mates on the boat were probably who really showed me the most, because they were more hands-on. And, if you went fishing, say, offshore, you could, but if you yellowtailed, you grouper fish, you sailfish, you kingfished, you'd rig up 20 or 30 rods in a day, different rigs. So kind of watching them and learning. And I was like, I guess kind of being a hands-on person, so I like to do it, and whether, it was twisting a haywire twist for a wire leader and all that stuff. So
right. Cool.
But a number of teachers, no doubt. So
so how did you get to being this iconic sword fisherman?
So I was either 14 or 15 years old. It was either 99 or 2000. I don't remember what year it was. I believe it was 99. but a boat was going out sword fishing from here. The Noble Lady was called with Captain Mark Ellis. And we were coming in from a fishing trip on the Catch-22 with my uncle and my dad. And they said, hey, we're going sword fishing. It was a nice, calm night. Like, does Nick want to go with us? And I was like, I don't have anything. They had pizza on the boat and stuff like that. I'm like, sure, I'll go. So we're out there, on the reef, and I jump on this different boat. And we go out there, and that night we caught about a 70-pounder. My job was to hold a Q-beam. So I'm holding the spotlight, and it's Mark Ellis. Jared was the boat owner, his family. David Applegate was there as the mate, and we catch this swordfish about 70 pounds, and people were just starting to catch him then again. I'd seen Charlie Scoble on the How About It. He'd caught one around that same time. He brought it in, and we had never seen a swordfish before. I had never had.
How many years ago do you think this is?
It's around 99.
Okay.
So, what's 24 years ago, I guess?
Yeah.
Is that what that is? So somewhere around there. And that night was the first swordfish I ever saw caught, and it was a really cool fish. It was like a mythical creature almost at that point. And my dad had caught him years ago. But then the nighttime fishing started catching on, and people up and down the coast, Miami, Lauderdale, here in Almirada, Key West, around 2000 started going out at night and started catching them with some consistency. Not every trip, but maybe half the trips. And they were good at getting away. We lost a lot, but that was kind of my first introduction to them. Went on a few night trips. The first one I caught on rod and reel myself was the following year. So it's probably around 15 years old. It was like 20 pounds. It was very small, but it was a swordfish. I was like ecstatic and stoked, to catch one. And that's probably when the obsession started, happening. We started going at night and catching a few more. And then my dad and uncle, they had caught one January 2003 on the Catch-22 in the daytime. And a few more the next few years, but it wasn't with like consistency or hadn't cracked the code or figured it out by any means. And then I was in college, University of Miami. I was coming back, running some charters, fishing with my dad a lot on the weekends when we started doing the sword fishing thing. And one day we caught 2 in 2006. That was the first one I ever saw caught. So we caught 2 that day and 2 that night, all on rod and reel, all hand crank. And they had caught some before that, but that for me was really like the kickstart. Like, hey, this is really cool. Like, there's not another big fish you could go target out here. It has a sword on the end of its face. It swings around. Like, it's really neat. And you could hook a 200 or 300, 400 pound fish any given day. So 2006 is when my obsession began with them. And in college, after that, started coming back that last year, 2 I was in school and fishing with my dad. And we would fish a ton, all throughout the summer. We'd go 2, 3, 4 days a week sometimes. On breaks, I started doing classes, just Monday through Thursday. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, come down and go a day or 2 with him. And we had got a commercial permit so I could sell the fish that we caught. So I'd make a day's pay,
Sure.
So you'd make $300 or $400 for a fish, which he was happy with because he just wanted to go out there and go fishing, and I could do all the work. And it was a lot of work. You had to have, 10 or 12 concrete sinkers on the boat. We had to get fuel on the boat. You had to get ice. You had to get your rods, your reels. You'd break off tackle. It would take us hours to re-rig, the braided line and the wind-on leader, all that. So it was a lot of work, but I guess it was my senior year in high school, 2007. Started doing more and more of it, doing charters for it, and that eventually became my niche for a charter business and kind of what I became known for the next few years. Hey, you want to go sword fishing? Like, I can take you on a charter. We have a fairly good success rate. We're catching about 75% of the time, and on a good year, maybe 80% of the trip. So pretty good. And for me, it was exciting because it was new. I didn't have to compete with all the other charter boats in town. Like, oh, you want to go on a dolphin trip? Sure, there's 100 boats trying to do that trip in town. Oh, the swordfish trip, there's one guy, and I kind of, became that guy. My uncle did trips as well, but that became my niche, and then social media, the way I advertised, really, made it what I became known for.
So there was not very many people advertising for swordfish trips just because their knowledge base, they didn't know?
Yeah, it was an expensive fishery to get into. The rods, the reels, you could spend, a couple $1,000 on go buy an 80 wide reel, a rod. The braided line was $300 or $400. A big LP light was $50, $60. You make one drop and you lose it all. You could lose $300, $400, $500 in one drop like that. And being a charter boat, where a lot of those guys only clear $500 a trip, honestly, once it's said and done, like, you better charge more money for it. And it probably became a little tough. How are you going to demand that price, or charge that extra money for it if you're not really confident in it or put the time in? So, and it's a very boring type of fishing.
I was just going to ask that. I can't imagine being out there in the middle of the night, waiting for your rod tip to do this.
well, night or day, so it can be both boring.
Both,
so
yeah.
in the daytime, but you're out there drifting for hours watching a rod tip, just waiting to see the slightest little bump. But
and that rod tip moves an inch.
An inch. And if you're not watching it, the fish may eat it and hook himself, but there is little techniques, trying to hook them and feeding the fish and all that stuff. But
what about on a rough day when the seas are rough?
It can be hard to see.
I mean, because the rod's got to be going up and down with the boat.
Oh yeah.
Do you have your hand on the line at all, or you just watch the rod tip?
Just watch the rod tip and get used to it. But I had spent all of us, my family fished together. Vic Gaspenny, he'd caught, he wound them all in at first. So for a lot of years, my dad owned the boat, the Keshe 2. My uncle Scott was the captain, and he probably gets the least amount of credit. He deserves probably the most because he drove the boat, found the spots, set us up on it, but he doesn't chase fame, I guess, like the rest of us. But he's happy just going fishing, and doing that. But Vic would wind them all in. I'd rig the baits. And there was always a mate too, KJ was the mate for a long time, or Hunter. So we had a couple different mates on my uncle's boat, and we fished a lot. He would do charters as well, but if you go out there and you fish 6, 8, 10 hours for one bite, like, it takes a lot of patience. And if you miss that fish, it's like...
And focus.
Yeah. So it's like, that was kind of boring. So a lot of people get burned out on it after a few years, of doing it.
Like at the first night.
Yeah, exactly. So some people never want to do it again. I had one customer I fished for years, and Kenny, and I think we went seven years in a row for his birthday, and he's in his 80s now, and we haven't fished the last couple of years, but he never saw a bite. And we caught a swordfish every time we went, and 8 trips, so 7 for his birthday, the 1 bonus trip because his daughter was in town. But he never saw a bite.
He never saw the
Never
rod.
saw the bite. And he's like, Nick, I don't know how you do it. He's like, you always see these bites. I'm watching the rod, but it's just so subtle like that. And
I find it difficult. Does the mate see the bite, or do you see it also as a captain of the boat? Or are you in the cockpit and you got somebody running the boat?
So usually...
Well, do you have a mate?
So when we started sword fishing a lot, we had a boat called the B&M, which was a 34-foot Crusader, twin diesel, basic commercial style fishing boat, nothing fancy. Then my uncle's boat, they had a 48-foot marine management for years. They had sold that, I think, around 2004, 3 or 4, and got that, and that was a 54-foot Carolina Blackwell. So that was faster, 20, 22-knot cruise, and big and comfortable. But I had spent most of my time on the Crusader, after we fished with my uncle a lot, going 14 or 15 knots, and we'd run down off Marathon. We always joked because, Vic would be like, well, if it's too rough, we won't go. It'd be blowing 20 knots, 4 to 6 footers, 7 footers sometimes. We never turned around. Once we had the boat loaded, we were going. But it was back then, so a lot of times it'd be me, my dad. My dad would run the boat a lot too. Vic would catch the fish. Then we'd bring a friend or two, whether it was one of their friends or our friends, and they would help maybe gaff a fish for keeping it, or one of my friends from school or that I grew up with down here. And in the beginning, we were learning so much, and it was exciting, I think, for anybody that went on the boat just to see it, because it'd be one thing if you saw a swordfish at night, but to see one in the daytime come up and the colors, the blues, the purples, see one jump, it was exciting.
Yeah. Let's go back. You mentioned a second ago, in the early days, you were taking cinder blocks to get the bait down.
So we tried a bunch of different things.
And how would you connect the cinder blocks to your leader or the line?
So the fishing now looks very simple and easy, and we kind of cheat a little bit now and use electric reels a lot. But say you're hand cranking, and we want a breakaway weight, a weight that would break off. In Venezuela, where they really started the daytime sword fishing, where they pioneered it in the mid-90s, there's no current down there. I think maybe they have a half an knot of current, so you could tie up a rock to your bait, put a 1 or 2 pound lead up 50 feet, drop it down, and you could fish for 30, 40, 50 minutes because you're not moving that much. But you go out here in the Gulf Stream and it's moving 3 or 4 knots. If you break your weight off and that bait floats up, you're only fishing for 5 or 10 minutes, and then it's out of the zone. Then it's up 500 feet, and that bottom, a few hundred feet is kind of where they focus, where they stay. But for us, what we made some molds. We took PVC pipe, about the same as a 2.5 quart paint bucket. So they weighed between 12 and 15 pounds. That became our standard sinker for about 10 years. We would attach that to the line. So we have an 80 wide reel, 2 little pieces of floss on the wind-on leader. It's called about 100 feet long. We'd pull those loops together, so you got a big loop in your heavy wind-on. We'd put a piece of 15 or 20 pound test between there, and that was like our tippet. My dad always referred to it like a fly tippet.
Sure.
So that'd be the weak point in it. And if we got a bite and the fish pulled hard enough on the hook, he would break that 15 or 20 pound test. Your sinker would fall off, that 12 or 15 pound concrete weight. And if we didn't get a bite, you could put the boat ahead and there was enough surface area on that concrete, sinker that we had that the pressure on it would break the monofilament anyhow. So that would pop. So then you could wind it up with no lead on there, because we didn't have a drill back then or electric reel. You don't want to crank a 12 pound lead up in 1,800 feet of water. You kill yourself.
I can't imagine.
It's like I have tennis elbow, like maybe it's swordfish elbow, but tendonitis is so bad in there, I can hardly grip a reel some days. And we would crank miles of line back in the day. And before that, we even had a 10-pound stick lead on there, actual lead. We would put an anchor ball on it, use a poly ball like this, how you pull an anchor, how you hook on your rope and you slide it down the line to pull your anchor up. We would do that with a swordfish rod. You'd go ahead, 500, 600, 700 feet. You'd back down on it. You'd crank as fast as you could. And we had a few times where we hooked swordfish, doing that. We didn't catch them, but you'd use that just to retrieve your lead.
Yeah.
But the breakaway lead was a big revolution in the fishing, when you could check your bait without it. And if you hooked a swordfish, you could fight the fish without having a 12-pound lead. And we still would leave about a 2-pound lead on there, but that way you didn't have to deal with a 12-pound weight, because it's a big fish can swim the lead up. But if you hook a small fish, or even a medium fish, and if he doesn't swim that lead all the way up, you're cranking, a 12-pound weight up 2,000 feet of line plus or more. It's brutal.
Yeah.
It's like it wears you out. So,
I think that you mentioned something about foul hooking.
Sure.
Is that why I'm thinking that if I was a sword fisherman, a lot of the bites you foul hook the fish, I would always want to fish a J hook, and you would never fish a circle hook. Is that the reason why, or does that play a role?
They're just, a swordfish is a sloppy feeder. They have that big bill. They hit the bait, no doubt when they hit the bait, the force they do, that bait goes flying back by their tail sometimes. But day or night, you foul hook fish. I think sometimes they see the light, they come racing into it as well. We tried everything. The first one I caught in the daytime was on a circle hook. The first two I caught actually that day. And the first one was small, barely keeper, 47 inches, but we were excited. But that was like a 20-0 circle hook, huge, with a whole mahi this big, and the fish was, not even 50 pounds, 45 pounds, barely a keeper. But he would still try to eat a bait, this big. The next one we caught that afternoon was a smaller circle, maybe a 12-0, but it was hooked in the top of the eye socket, not even in the mouth. With a mullet, we're using a split-tail mullet for the bait, and we thought the fish got off. I'm sitting in the chair cranking, and I get out of the chair, and we're like, how could this fish get off there? He's swimming up all the way. I'm pulling the line in, and we look down, there's a 100-foot leader, and we're handlining it in where the last light was, and there's 125-pound swordfish swimming right next to the boat from me to you away, and they're just such unusual creatures. They do very odd stuff. They want to see, what's pulling on them. So it's not uncommon for one to come all the way to the boat, right next to the boat and check it out. And they love to go on the wheels. They try to get in the props a lot. But we reached over, the fish lay there, and we gaffed it, and we thought the fish was gone. I remember the light skipping in on the surface. I have an old video of it somewhere. And I'm pulling it in by hand. We looked down, like, there's a swordfish here. I'm screaming, yelling to get the gaff and whatnot. So they're just very unusual fish, but we did kind of get away from the circle hooks, and we used J hooks. We still foul hook some, but to catch a big one, your best shot, is hooking them in the corner of the mouth. The big giant one I caught was foul hooked in the throat area, which made it harder, but ideally in the mouth is where you want them, but you can't control it. You got 2,000 to 3,000 feet of line out on average, and they're a sloppy feeding fish with a big nose and inquisitive, and I swim all around the bait. So.
How many fewer fish would you catch if you fished exclusively with a circle hook? 50%?
I think I would catch more than I used to, because I'm more patient when I hook them now, and I'm a little bit better at it. Because you see this little the rod tip bounces, and that's them hitting it with their bill. When you see these little taps, and we didn't know if they were on there before, if they were just hitting it. So a lot of times I think we'd crank prematurely, but I would catch some on it, I'm sure. There are some guys using circle hooks and catching them. I believe, though, in a low current situation, the circle hook would be more beneficial. We're always moving on average 2 to 3 knots, so that bait is always kind of moving around. So it's hard to get that clean feed that you do like with a sailfish or a blue marlin where you use a circle hook, where he can eat it, not feel any resistance or pressure. So the Gulf of Mexico, I know people are doing pretty well. And there are some guys in Miami catching a few on them. But it was probably about 4 years ago. I remember I caught 1 out of 4 or 5 bites the one day. I'm like, how did I miss, whatever it was. I missed 3 or 4 swordfish a day, and I caught 1. How did I miss all these fish? I said, I'm going to go back to circle hooks. So I went to a little bit thinner wire, a little bit smaller hook. The next day we go out there and I have 2 beautiful mahi bellies rigged with circle hooks in front of them. They look great. And we have 7 bites that day. We catch 5 of the 7. The 2 I lost were on the circle hook right by the boat. How do they come all the way up and still get away? But the day before I only caught 1 out of 4 on J hooks. But they're just some days they feed better, they're more aggressive. And you probably see it with tarpon too, where they're blowing up on the bait and then the next day you catch 5 out of 5, and one day you miss 5 in a row. So
you went 0 for 27, didn't you?
Before a Gold Cup that I went 0 for 20. I caught 1 out of 28 bites, 1 out of 28 fish. I hooked them, they'd chew through, they'd fall off. I'd break them. I didn't break too many, but they'd always get off. I'm thinking, I've got no chance. I have no chance, and then we ended up winning. But you go through these spells where, you always wonder, what am I doing wrong?
Right.
But I always told, I asked Tom Evans, one of the great fly fishermen of all time, I said, Tom, what am I doing wrong? He said, it's just the elements. You're doing nothing wrong. Just keep fishing, because if you start trying to change something, then you go backwards.
Sure.
Especially if you've been fishing for a long, long time, you've refined your craft, and you're really at the top of your abilities.
Sure.
Just keep going.
So you mentioned when you get a bite, that rod tip moves an inch. Sometimes, it'll move quite a bit based on the bill hitting the bait. How do you know when to crank? How do you know when's the time to bring the line in to hook that fish?
To set the hook.
Yeah, set the hook.
It's tricky.
There's a bunch of feel involved.
Yeah, and you could catch, really seeing the rod when it loads up and starts getting heavy. We kind of go to a heavy drag, because I would rather lose that fish the first minute or two than an hour later. But, just being patient, waiting to see that rod start loading over, when it gets heavy and steady and you feel like he's got the bait.
So if it doesn't load over, would you drop it back?
I would do both, yeah. I would drop it back, and if he didn't eat it, I would take it away to try to make him more aggressive, and almost like you're teasing him to try to get a more aggressive bite. And the fun with swordfish, though, when you go tarpon fishing and say you're fishing a big oceanside fish, the fish are probably 50 to 100 pounds, say. They're not 5 pounds. You could have a 10 or 15 pound swordfish trying to eat a bait this big.
Right.
A 300 pounder comes in there, he can eat a lot easier, but there is such a drastic size difference between some of these fish out there from drop to drop. Like, I have caught a 20 pounder one drop and a 400 pounder the next drop. You would downsize your tackle, your hook size, your leader size, and all that stuff, but we have to be ready for the big one. So if I knew, the general size they were going to be, I would probably adapt to the size bait, the size hook, the size leader, but we have to be ready in case the big one bites,
So you always fish for the big fish.
You have to be ready just in case.
That's all you fish with.
And I've lost the big ones. I've lost more big ones than I've caught, but I think that's one thing which makes hooking the smaller fish tough too. And I think sometimes too, they're like a cat and a mouse. Vic used to say at Gaspeny, he was my dad's dear friend and friend of mine, and he caught, a couple hundred of these swordfish with us, but it's like a cat and a mouse. The swordfish may not be hungry or want it to eat the bait, but he don't want it leaving. Like, he'll still whacking. We've had it where 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 minutes pass by, and every 30 seconds, the rod tips bounces. They're not eating it, but they're hitting it, and they just almost want to kill it, almost like they're playing with it. So they're an unusual fish, but, seeing the rod load up and knowing, if he's still on there, if he came off, because it takes years, of watching a rod tip to see, oh, he's there or he's gone. And now we fish a lot of electric reels now. It's still fun and exciting. People like going out there. If you were hunting and you got to go one time a year, your best shot would be, using a rifle. After you've done it a bunch, you don't mind using the bow, but that's what I tell people. Like, if you have one day to go and you want to have fun with your friends, relax and catch a swordfish, the electric is, probably a better suited thing.
Get the meat.
Exactly. And just people out there relaxing. They're not, if you're a diehard angler, sure, hang cranking, but you want to go out there with your buddies, drink a few beers and have some fun or whatever. The electric's still challenging. You can still fight a fish for hours and hours on it.
Are you fighting the fish on the electric, or is your client doing it?
Usually the client. So I guess you were kind of asking earlier if I had a mate. I had a mate years ago on my old boats when I fished my little sport fish boats. I had a 34 Crusader, the B&M. I'd always have a mate on my charter. Then I had a 36-foot Jersey Devil. I'd have a mate. But I'd always be at the Capt, at the chair, the helm, watching the rod tip. But then back in January 2016, I got my first Freeman, like a Go Fast Center console. And I kind of got that because I could fish by myself. I didn't have to have a mate. And I'm probably like to do things my own. If there was a problem, I can blame myself this way, So I didn't have a mate for the first few years I started running that boat. I'd have a friend or two, ride along here and there, but I did a lot myself just with the clients and the guests. But I would have them on the rod and the reel. I'd have a few people that want to do stand-up, but when we got away from the sport fish boats that had a fighting chair, standing up with a 50 or an 80 wide reel is kind of difficult. Like if you're in decent shape, you can do it, but if you don't fish on a regular basis, to tell someone, here, put on an 80 wide, into a harness, stand up for the next hour to 2 hours, it's going to be challenging. Where you could leave in the holder and crank, but the electrics got more popular and people
convenience.
Yeah, convenience, and the people still seem to enjoy it. They're still happy being out there and catching them. So it wasn't.
Well, I think that's
different,
exemplified by the 757 you caught. It towed the boat, or you were on the boat 20 miles, 8 hours. I can't imagine doing that, hand cranking. It would have probably doubled both of those dimensions.
It could have, and I would say a good angler could catch a fish faster on a stand-up rod, or in a chair than the electric, because you can use your body, you could feel it more. But the rod and the reel, the electric takes out. You can keep steady pressure on the fish, because you can keep the motor on, and it kind of a little bit of angular error. It helps eliminate some of that. So, but it's still challenging for me. The challenge really became you're going out in the middle of the ocean, finding the fish, doing it consistently, dropping a bait down 1,500 to 1,800 feet of water, getting a bite, hooking it, and catching it, because it can be hard to hook a fish 20 feet away sometimes, let alone 2,000 to 3,000 feet of line could be out. So
it's crazy to think that you're teasing a fish, communicating with the fish, reading the fish, when the fish is 1,700 feet below the boat in a blue ocean. That to me is fascinating.
And the bite, when they hit the bait, it travels. And when the current's going 4 knots, you could have 3,000 feet of line out. You could have double the line out as the depth of water you're in with a 10 or 12 pound weight on. And it telegraphs all the way up that rod, and you see this little tiny think, and in your head, you don't know, is this a 20 pounder or is this Forklift Fred? So
right.
Fred was the name.
Forklift Fred.
Fred was the name my dad, my uncle, Vic, and me had for the giant swordfish we were chasing all these years. And there used to be a forklift here to pick the boats in out of the water. There's not here anymore, but, that was what kept us going out there, This
Looking
could be
for
Fred.
What was the number?
400 pounds back then. And it took me 5 years to catch a 400-pound swordfish. And some people catch a 400-pounder their first time out there. But I'd caught over 200 swordfish to see my first 400-pounder caught. But, and I started catching some bigger ones, and we got better at it. Our percentages went up. And we don't get as many bites as we used to get, but we still get pushes of fish where almost 2 years ago from now was, just before Christmas 2 years ago, so just almost 2 years. But we had 2 days in a row, we caught 10 swordfish each day, which I never caught that many before. We had enough bites to do it back in the day, but we weren't as good at hooking them and catching them.
Right.
So we still get some pushes of fish, and we've been lucky. So, you're going on 18 years of a consistent fishery. And a lot of these fish we do tag and release a lot of them. I think 5 of the last 6 years I won the most tagged and released for the Billfish Foundation with my clients, my customers that don't mind letting them go. And we kind of started years ago. If we had caught a keeper and we caught another one, we would let it go. I didn't want to take
2 or 3 keepers.
Exactly. We didn't need to do it. I didn't have anything to prove anymore. In the beginning, when you first start something, you're exciting and whatnot, but we started letting a lot of them go. We kind of got away from selling them about 7 or 8 years ago. We still have the old permit, but I haven't used it in years. But we wanted this fishery to last, and if it's healthy, swordfish is great eating. I don't really think we're denting the population fishing one rod. We've maybe fished 2 rods, 1 hook on each, so 2 hooks at a time, compared to, a commercial boat would fish 1,000 hooks. But we've been lucky. It held up really good and made a great charter business out of it. Took people from all over the world sword fishing. It was an IGFA, the Royal Slam, one of those fish on that billfish list. So I've had a number of customers check that one off with me. So that's been really cool.
What's the science are you getting any data or research or science back from the studies, the tag and release studies?
We've done a couple with satellite tags, which kind of tracks them and gives you a route, but they all don't go the same route. They go different directions. And there's been other tags from other fishermen, like RJ Boyle. He put some out. Some of the fish go south, some go north, some went to the Bahamas. So they're hard to figure, but it's the ones that I've done with the Billfish Foundation tags. They don't track the position, the location, but if someone recaptures it, you'll know where they caught it.
Gotcha.
But I've had a couple off Cuba. I've had one in the Gulf of Mexico. Some as far north as Canada, like Newfoundland up there.
No
and stuff.
way.
Yeah. So these fish
recapture was up in Canada.
So these fish will go, thousands of miles, and you don't know where they go in between. I've never caught a tagged one. I've caught over 2,000 swordfish. I've seen a lot caught, but I've never caught a tag one myself, and I've tagged probably 250 or more, I would say. So we've got a lot of tags out there, and they're a pretty prolific species. I mean, they grow fairly quick. You know, a healthy one can grow 40 to 50 pounds a year. Maybe a slow grower grows 20 pounds a year, but to catch a fish 50 pounds 1 year and 3 years later, that fish would be 150 to 200 pounds, 150 pounds is impressive. It's good, you know, it's a neat fish.
So every one you catch, you mark, you log. How do you know you've caught 2,000?
I used to write them all down. I had counted to 1,000. I still have probably 99% of them written down in my journal, but I have not gone back through it the last 5 or 6 years, but I was averaging, 100 fish a year or so when I was fishing quite a bit. So if I did 100 trips a year and I caught 100, would be good. Yeah. So I'm like, the last 6 or 8 years, been another 600 to 800 fish.
Has anyone have more numbers than you?
No one else is fishing.
I don't know. I mean, I did a lot of charters there, and I doubt half of those were on hand crank, and half were on electric. I don't know if anyone has that many. I'm not sure, to be honest.
Are you the best sword fisherman?
Probably not. Nah.
Who do you think would be?
There's a handful of good fishermen out there. A lot of the, there's some really good commercial fishermen that were doing it for years, catching them, and they only make a living by selling their fish as well.
Right.
I'm at charters. I tell bad jokes. I make a living entertaining doing both. So, but no, there'd be a handful of really good sword fishermen out there. Bouncer Smiths and Acrylic sword fishermen. The guys in the booby trap in Texas. R.J. Boyle, my other buddy Brandon here in Duck Key. Scott, my uncle Scott. So there's a number of really good fishermen.
Right.
I did it a lot. It became an obsession. That was the core of my charter business for 10 years. That's all I did, really.
Yeah.
So
before we go to a different subject, the conservation for swordfish is very interesting in that the harpoon fishery began off in New England back in the 1800s, the early 1800s. In the 1920s, recreational fisheries began to develop. In 1960, the longliners replaced the harpoons. In 1985, the U.S. implements the first Atlantic Swordfish Management Plan. And in 1991, they established a minimum size limit. But there was a period where, like around 2000, a little bit earlier, 1996, ICAT adopts a 3-year reduction in total allowable catches. So the longliners were really depleting the ocean.
They did catch a lot of fish, yeah.
They were depleting the ocean. And they were also depleting a lot of the sharks. So, but in 2000, ICAT implements a 10-year swordfish rebuilding plan in 2000. Longlining was banned in 2001. So between 2001, in 2001 too, closures began to benefit swordfish. They stopped fishing in certain areas. So they knew that the sword fishing was in danger. So from 2001 to 2009, ICAT declares North Atlantic swordfish stock fully rebuilt because of conservation efforts. In 2017, they declare the North Atlantic stock remains fully restored. So from 2009 and 2017, it stayed level. So hats off to conservation and ICAT and those guys. Did you see, because you were saying there for a while we weren't catching very many, then all of a sudden we started catching more and more and more. Is that because of refining your techniques?
A little bit of both.
And more fish.
It was mind-blowing, say from 2006 and on, when we were really swordfish heavy. And obviously my dad caught some, my uncle before that. But that's when I really got into it and doing a lot of it. You could go out there almost anywhere and drop and get a bite. Not every drop, but there are some days you got a bite every drop no matter where you dropped. And there was a lot of them. They must have paved the bottom, out there. We still have some good days like that. The numbers, to me, are hard because we don't fulfill our quota with ICAT, which I think is the International Commission for Atlantic Tunas.
Yes.
And all that stuff that manages all the fisheries. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. If we don't fill that quota, at some point another country could get part of our unused swordfish quota.
Right.
They may have
So you almost feel obligated to kill fish.
Almost.
So they don't get the allotment.
Exactly, because they may not have size restrictions, they may not have gear restrictions,
Right.
and all that. So if these fish, and some of these fish they go all around the world, they may be doing more damage to that. So it's a really touchy area, and subject in this whole situation there, because we let a lot of them go. I guess my question is, I don't know if the numbers are accurate for the stock assessments and all that stuff. We do have a healthy fishery overall, but it's not as consistent now, especially when you go up to Miami and Fort Lauderdale, as it was 10 years ago. So was it residential fish that lived in all these areas that didn't leave? Because I think tarpon do it. Some fish just live here. And then you have these big giant migrations. But when you get that push of fish down here, in the fall and the winter from the northeast, thousands and thousands of fish are coming through. So it's hard to say. Personally, I really don't know. I think we got to keep doing more research, but no doubt the last 20 years, 25 years, there has been a big push of conservation, and it did help the fishery. I just don't know for myself, like you said, you almost feel obligated to keep that fish, because if we don't fill that quota at some time and point, this quota could go to a different country, and it could be a neighboring, country, whether it's the Caribbean or a different one. So, and they may net the fish, they may do this, they may have no minimum size limit. And obviously we want a size limit that makes sense, where the fish get, at least have a chance, to spawn one day or whatnot.
Right.
So
what is your restrictions? What is your quota? I think it's 1 fish per person?
1 per person per day, up to 6 per charter, or if you're on a private boat, up to 4 per boat. I personally think that's too many.
Right.
You're not really going to catch 6 in a day on a charter, very hard to do that. We're hoping to catch 1 per trip, but the minimum size is 47 inches. It honestly, if it went up to 55 inches or 60 inches, it wouldn't bother me at all. A 100-pound fish is right around 60 inches. A 47-inch fish is 45 to 50 pounds. But, it wouldn't bother. And we kind of self-regulate too a lot of times, whether it's any species,
Sure.
swordfish, mahi, snappers. I'm not going to go out there. You can keep, I think it's still 60 mahi, or maybe it's 54 now because they changed it. But if we caught 20 or 30 mahi in a day, we're happy, dolphin. As a kid, we used to catch a lot more big fish, but it's kind of up to us, the fishermen, to make the decision.
Right.
If I caught 4 swordfish in one day and they're all 50 or 60 pounds, if we kept 1 or 2 for dinner, I don't need to keep the other couple. There's no point to do it for me. So I think we have to self-regulate and, kind of just pick and choose. And, if it's a healthy fishery and it's deemed that by science, that's fine. But some of this still falls back on the fishermen too,
Right. Do you have aspirations of ever sitting on a board of conservation like the Billfish Foundation?
I haven't really ever thought about it, to be honest with you. So.
Because at some point we want to give back. We've had such a great life, and you're still very young. But let's just say down the road, I would think your voice on a conservation board would be awesome, because who's caught more fish than guys like yourself?
Yeah, it's strange, because if you look back 15 years ago, we had a commercial permit. I would catch and keep every legal fish we could, If it was borderline, we let it go. But I think some people a lot of people in life do this, so they change, like that.
Sure.
As
you evolve.
You evolve. You get softer when you get older. You don't have anything to prove, It's
Right.
like if you're a hunter, you're going to pass on the deer nowadays that you didn't ever pass on before.
Right.
But maybe one day, I do, I'm the secretary for the local Charter Boat Association, which we do some of the stuff here, with the different organizations and fishing committees and stuff like that. So involved with that. I hadn't really ever thought about the Billfish Foundation. Kind of being in the Keys, we're away from some of the city stuff that happens, in the metropolitan areas. So I would say the travel, and if it was a Zoom meeting, that'd be easier, but maybe the travel keeps me from doing some of the other activities and events.
Down the road, I'm just planting that seed.
Maybe I can think about it.
Yeah.
So,
He's a great salesman.
Yeah.
For conservation.
Well, look, my
No, I agree with you.
What
Yeah.
I do now is, I like to fish, but I really I like to give back, and it's a feel good thing, but it's also, I think, an obligation to give back to a resource that's given you so much.
Sure.
I'm interested in what you do out there. Is it pretty defined as far as where you fish off the continental shelf, from what I understand, the big break in the ocean floor? Tell me a little bit about that. And also, too, is it getting crowded out there? Because you've shown people that it's a very successful fishery.
So I got my first Go Fast boat, this Freeman catamaran, in January 2016.
Is that to keep people from following you?
I could beat my uncle out there now. But, I built my charter business around sword fishing, but, I went from going 15 knots in the B&M, for 7 or 8 years to going 30 to 40 knots. And then the boat after that, 3.5 years later, had a 37-footer with 4,300 Yamahas. I could run 70 miles an hour. I didn't really run that fast, but the boats got bigger and faster. The tackle got, bigger and stronger and more efficient. But it gave me more fishing time was a big thing too. So if you cut off an hour each way traveling, you get 2 more hours to fish. I mean, that's huge in fishing, Get an extra bite or two throughout the year, 100 days a year. That adds up, going to catch a lot more fish. But so the Freeman, that was when I got that boat, that was a big change in my career and my trajectory in life and business and kind of what I did with social media, build my business and all that. But we fish the continental shelf, so it's the drop-off. It's a natural highway for swordfish. It pretty much runs from 1,500 to 2,000 feet. Some areas is flat bottom, a very slow, gradual slope. Some areas is like a side of a mountain, straight up and down, steep. There can be fish on both of them, but some areas hold bait better. And the bait will get, in an area and stay there for a while, and that's what holds the fish there. And then you could go one day, and I remember catching 7 fish one day, going back the next day and catching 1. Like, they can be here and gone overnight. They can move.
Do you sometimes travel looking for bait and then decide to drop
Definitely.
lines
So
once you find the bait?
when the sonars got better, you get this, giant Airmar transducer, 3kW, and these better electronics, and we were marking bait. Like, years ago, we're kind of dropping blind sometimes because we could barely read bottom, but there was fish were just kind of out there. It didn't really matter. You had more room for error, but being able to mark the bait, and if, say, you marked bait and you didn't get a bite, maybe in the afternoon the fish would be there feeding, you could come back to that spot later on. But basically, if you went out there anywhere off the coast from 1,400 feet to 2,000 feet of water, potential for swordfish. They swim by there. There could be fish inside of it and outside of it, but that was like a natural highway. And if there was a break in the wall, a little nook or cranny, something to hold bait, that was always a good spot to target. And we had some areas, we had our one area called the honey hole, and I remember the GPS coordinates still, we had these old bathymetric charts, and my dad had got them through Max Mayfield. He was the director of the Hurricane Center, and the GPS plotters didn't have all the contour lines on them back then, so you would just have this blank kind of chart area, but he had got this, and we could see where the shelf is a more steeper, and there was a bend in it from having these weather charts, so we picked spots on there and went there, and there was fish in all of them. The honey hole was our best area we had for years, and I think we did it was mostly on the catch with my uncle, but I believe it was 35 drops in a row, over a 7 or 8 trip span. We had a bite every single drop. It was amazing, and we weren't catching them all. We were catching, a few of them, but you got so many bites. You get 7, 8, 10 bites a day. You'd catch a few of them. But just trying different areas, and sometimes, in between spots, so, who's this guy here? Got some guy out there, a weekend warrior, never doing it, and he catches a big giant fish, but, he was fishing in between 2 areas and never fished, but in no man's land, we call it, but sometimes the fish still got to swim there and you could catch them.
Right.
But trial and error, trying new spots. The GPS charts got better, the bathymetry on them. The sonars, you could run around and mark spots and try something. And
Can you mark a swordfish down there?
You can. It's difficult. We used to mark occasional one, but the last few years, I'd say the last 5 or 6 years, having these better transducers and better GPS, units, we don't mark them all, but it's like, hey, what's that? And all of a sudden, a minute later, you get a bite on there.
Right.
Or you mark one, you move the bait up some, and there he is. So we do mark them all, but we do mark some of them. We don't mark them all. But it's amazing that you can mark a fish 1,800 feet below the boat, swimming by that's down there for 20 seconds as he goes by and whatnot. Or a lot of times too, we'd hook a fish and you're fighting them and you're not watching the sonar the whole time and oh, there he is. That was the fish you hooked probably.
Right. How about marlin? Do you ever catch marlin as a bycatch?
We've caught a few marlin, dropping the bait down. We've had blue marlin and white marlin eat it. So I've caught 3 or 4 blue marlin. I've lost a couple too. I think I've caught 2 white marlin. I caught a sailfish 1,200 feet down once. Caught a big giant, a wahoo with 69 pounds. That was the biggest one I ever caught here.
Tuna?
I've caught 3 giant bluefin tunas. Those baits were actually down, set on the bottom, down deep, so they didn't eat it on the drop. So those fish were migrating, eating them. We caught one this past June, actually, and then last year we caught a really big one that we fought all day and into the night. But I've caught
Did you get them?
Yeah, we got them up to the boat, yeah.
How big?
The one this year was probably 450 to 500 pounds, but the one last year was 800 plus. He was huge.
No kidding.
Yeah, we fought him all day into the night. And about 10 days before that, my mate Mike was running the boat. I don't fish as much as I used to, but he had fought a giant swordfish for 9 hours, and they'd broke the line on him. They had that fish on the leader 10 times, and we had this green braid we'd been using. There had been shortages of tackle the last 3 or 4, last 2-3 years with COVID. You couldn't get product sometimes, so we had this, and I don't know if it was a bad batch of line or what, but we had some failures with it, so we hooked this big fish. We didn't know it was a tuna at first, and the mate that was with me, he had lost a big swordfish the week prior with my other captain running the boat, so he's like, Nick, take it easy, let's just catch this fish, and we fought that giant tuna for 15 hours.
My God.
We caught it, thank God, but that was a big fish. He was minimum 800 pounds. It could have been bigger.
Did you know it was a tuna with the way it was fighting?
At first, I thought it was a swordfish because he raced up to the surface, which is indicative of a swordfish. But then when he melted the line and went back down and stayed down deep for 3 or 4 hours, I thought it was a tuna. And to catch a big bluefin, you need heavy drag. But he's like, what if it's a big sword? I'm like, you're right. Let's just take our time. We never expected
because
to fight.
you pull hooks with
You
swordfish.
pull hooks with heavy drag, and we had been breaking that line, that green braid. We had this batch of line. He had literally broke off, a 600-700 pound swordfish just a week before that, pretty much. So the mate with me is like, just take our time, we'll get him. And the hours start passing, and then you keep thinking, all right, we're going to get him soon, and another hour passes. We caught the fish, which I'm glad, but that was the longest fight I ever had with a fish. And we didn't want to break him off, and it was 1 a.m. when we caught him, and eventually just locked the drag down. And in your head, when you think it's a tuna, you got to go to heavy drag because that's the only way to catch them.
Right.
The other 2 I caught this year was about 3.5 hours. That fish acted like a swordfish too, though. He came up to the surface 2 or 3 times, scoped out, then he went all the way down. But when he went down deep, he died on the bottom. And that fish was probably 450 pounds, maybe 500. I figured it was a big tuna, and we just full drag, plant him up with a boat, go ahead, 400 yards, plant him up a few hundred feet and back down on him. You have the Gulf Stream out there with a current, when it's going 3 knots or more, it's hard to pull a fish through that, but we eventually got him. The tuna have a funny season, so unfortunately we couldn't bring him back to the dock because you catch this year was 1 day before season opened, June 1st, and I have that commercial endorsement now, but the bluefin tuna rules are so tricky. Most people don't realize, when you can keep one, when you can't. But when the commercial season or the recreational giant season fills up, you can't keep them. Usually around March is kind of when they shut it down. And then June 1st, it reopens with the commercial season. But if you don't have that commercial endorsement on your regular HMS permit, you couldn't keep one anyhow. Right. Which even the charter boats don't know that. It's so confusing. But yeah, so we've caught a few bluefin tuna, a couple big eye tuna, blackfin tuna, a wahoo, blue marlin, white marlin, sailfish. But you're talking, 500 drops or 1,000 drops
right. It's
for every odd fish. So it's such a small percentage.
What about predation? You see does a lot of your swordfish get sharked? Mako sharks?
A few. So the Mako sharks are our main predator. I've caught 4 or 5 Makos that have bit them and came up chasing them. But very rarely. I see it.
It's not a problem.
Not a problem. No, you can catch it a few a year. Now the Makos are protected. You can't even keep them right now. And I caught 1 giant Mako. We were coming from swordfishing. We caught a couple of swordfish that day, and we saw a swordfish in 900 feet of water, but it was upside down with his pec fins up, so he was belly up with his pec fins floating. And we had looped back around, and there's this Mako shark, and he's every bit of 600 pounds, probably 700 pounds, huge, and eating this swordfish. And we had this swordfish rod. I put a shark rig on it and caught and released him. It was a really cool fish. And we didn't realize how big it was, but the swordfish, when we pulled it in the boat, this thing's heavy. He was missing his tail and part of his bill and some bites out of him. He was like 178 pounds alone. So that swordfish was like 200 pounder. And I'm like, dude, that Mako shark dwarfs him. The Mako shark's easily 600 pounds, if not 700. So that was cool. But I've caught maybe, I think 8 or 9 Makos here my whole life. It's not a ton. But
did that big one go flying through the air doing
he didn't
backflips?
Jump. No, I've had a few jump, but that one didn't jump. He was kind of more lethargic. And a Mako is funny. Some of them pull really hard and you fight them for an hour or two. But I've caught other ones that one we caught in 20 minutes. It wasn't bad, but I've caught others. Literally, I caught a 350 pounder a few years ago. We caught 5 swordfish, and a 300 pound Mako came up eating the swordfish. He was 300 pounds, maybe 350, but he took literally 20 feet of line and swam the boat, and we leadered him, and he swam there. So,
does a continental shelf, where does it run? How far north, how far south?
Up and down, I would assume the entire continental U.S. So, some areas it's further out. So, you go off the Carolinas, you got to go 60, 70, 80 miles to hit that deep water where the swordfish are. But there was just a tournament one of my friends ran, and they caught 3 giant fish, 3 fish over 300 pounds. I believe you could fish 2 or 3 days over a month period, but he caught a 498 pounder, and he fought it a long time, like 12 hours, but he won his own tournament. But, they were out 80 miles or so to catch that fish. But it's just that depth of water, and that's the continental shelf that, goes all around all the continents, really. So around the world, almost every continent around the world has swordfish. There's in the Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos, the Caribbean.
Africa.
Yeah, Africa, Australia.
Yeah.
Do they fish for them? I mean, is it popular to fish for swordfish around the world? Some places more popular than others?
Yeah, the last 8 or 10 years it really caught on.
Where is the most prolific swordfish spot?
I think ours would be the most consistent in the world, in the U.S. for sure.
What's second? Venezuela?
Probably Venezuela, maybe. They catch them there, pretty consistent, but the biggest swordfish in the world are New Zealand and Australia.
Really? Huh.
It's interesting because New Zealand has got the biggest striped marlin, and Australia's got the Great Barrier Reef in that area has got the biggest marlin, more consistently
Black
there.
marlin, yeah.
So, but also the swordfish too.
Yeah.
Is that off the Great Barrier Reef?
I'm sure they swim there. I swordfished off, so kind of down towards Melbourne. They've caught some really big ones too. Like I guess this would be the South Australia, I believe it would be that corner down there, Victoria and stuff like that. So I've been to Australia twice. Caught black marlin one trip, and then another trip we swordfished a couple of days, and we went to Tasmania, which is maybe 150 or 200 miles from the main continent of Australia, and took this guy fishing years ago, and he was from Australia. And we fished 2 days here. We lost a swordfish each day. And the one day was a nice fish, about 300 pounds. And I felt bad. The guy traveled, around the world to come here to catch a swordfish and do a TV show. But he was so happy. He had never seen a swordfish before. I don't know if he'd ever had a bite. And he had tried a number of times. So he kind of took what he saw here down to Australia as well and was fishing down there. And a few guys were starting to catch 1 or 2 here and there. This 8 or 10 years ago now. And he messaged me on Facebook, and he's like, Nick, I keep losing them. Should I do a single J-hook, a double J-hook, a circle hook? And I'm telling him, here's some baits and pictures and all that stuff. And I'm like, some days they just eat better. And then he has this day, and they catch 3 giant swordfish between 400 and 600 pounds. And I'm like, what hook did you use? He goes, I caught one on every hook I had rigged. So he caught one on the circle hook, one on the double J-hook, and one on the single J-hook. And that was off Tasmania. And then he invited me down there the next year, and he filmed a TV show. And I don't catch many fish myself. I have really bad tendonitis, so it's hard for me to turn the handle. My elbow hurts so bad and throbs. But he's like, let's go down there and swordfish. We'll do a TV show. So we did that, and I had hooked one early, and I fought it to the surface. He got off. I lost him. Then the next drop, I caught my first southern bluefin tuna, maybe about 60 pounds. So that was cool. I never caught a southern bluefin tuna. Then the 4th drop that day, and they all have aluminum boats down there, and they make a lot of noise when you're running. Bing, bing, bing. They're really loud, but Sarah sees the bite. My wife sees the bite on the swordfish rod, and she actually hooks the fish and drops it back, winds it, comes tight, and the guy and they were using a 20-0 J-hook, a 20-0. A 12-0 is big.
How big is a 20 with your hand?
It's bigger than your hand around. It's a gaff hook.
Right.
It's insane.
Wow.
And I asked the captain, nice young kid, and he's like, why do you use it? That's what we have down here, So a lot of places, you just use the tackle you can get, and he didn't have as many options, but it worked. It was a giant, like, rotten skipjack kind of belly bait, and we fight this fish, and it's hard to judge how big a swordfish is. The weight's in the girth, how fat the fish is, and if he carries that weight through his tail, you could add 100, 200 pounds on him just like that. So we're fighting this fish, and Paul's on the rod. I can see him the first half an hour. We get the leader, but the water's green down there. It's not blue and clear. It's a little green tint to it, and it's colder. But I can see this big fish. The fish is at least 400 pounds. He's big, but he's down, 30 feet. And I couldn't really tell. The fish goes down for 3 hours. Finally comes back up at hour 4, and they get him the leader. And we realize this fish is big, 600, 700 pounds, maybe even bigger. And we're filming a show for his TV show, and Lockie was the kid running the boat. Nice young kid, maybe around 20 years old. And we get the leader, and we want to get another picture, and he's shaking. We don't want to pull him off the leader. We're going to let this fish go. We're going to satellite tag it for research and let it go. Another boat comes over. He's fishing for swordfish with a scientist, gets in our boat, gets the tag ready, and the fish goes down. I'm like, he'll be back up in a minute or two. Goes down for another hour, down 200 feet. We couldn't budge him. We finally get him up, and we estimated that fish at 750 pounds.
Wow.
That was before I had caught I'd caught some up to about 450 here. I hadn't caught my 2 big ones. So I caught a 600 and that 757 pounder. I really didn't know how big the fish was, and it easily could have been 800 pounds. You know, the fish was so long. The bill on this fish is 5 feet long. It's insane. And the fish had length. You know, we have these underwater pictures next to this aluminum boat, and the thing's 3/4 as big as the boat. You know, it's big and long and massive. And this is the fish this is Forklift Fred. I've been fishing for this fish here for 10 years, and my dad and my uncle and all of us, and we have to let it go. So I didn't know what it weighed, but it was a really good feeling letting it go. It was really cool, you know, and I'd love to know what it weighed. You know, was it 680 pounds? Was it 780? Who knows? Maybe even more. It's hard to judge them in the water. You pull them out and you hang that thing up there. It could be massive.
They're always bigger when you pull them out of the water.
You hang that thing up there. That thing's 110, 112, 115 inches long, the short length and girth. I mean, there's no telling what it would have weighed. But that was really cool to see, to go to a different country, catch a giant swordfish and see it. And then I came back here and we got our 600-pounder, you know, I think that next year. And then a couple years later, we get that 757-pounder. And it very similar size, you know, give or take 50 pounds.
Did you get a mold of that 757?
So we had two choices.
Because you could have got a mold and still eating the meat, right? Couldn't have you?
They didn't have a mold big enough for it. So the biggest...
So don't you make a mold? You
have to use the actual fish.
Right.
So then you have to sacrifice the fish and the meat. So I called Gray Taxidermy up, which does all our fish mounts, and said, "Do you guys want to mount this? We can, but you're not going to get the fish back." So it's a little sinful because you feel like you're wasting this.
Right.
But in reality, if they make a mold of one, say a tarpon mount,
you're saving another fish.
You're saving hundreds of fish.
Also, science could take the inner ear and do some science on that big fish.
Definitely. So we had to make a decision. And I asked my customers on the boat, Bill and Debbie, do you guys want to eat this fish? Do you want to do a tail mounter mold? Gray's had a mold for a 600-pound fish, 605 pounds my friend Tim caught. So they had a very large mold, not quite as big. But they said, we can use this tail mount, you know, or you can do the whole fish. It'll be close. You know, it's still a little short. Mm-hmm. But I said, tell you what, let's cut off the back foot of the tail, make that stump. And we made a tail mold of it.
Sure.
And a mount. So we have that. It's at my house. You know, the tail mount's this big around, and we have it. But we ate the fish, and we gave that fish to so many people. I had people I didn't even know that had got fish from Bill and Debbie. They lived on the west coast of Florida. I get all these messages on Facebook. "Oh, we got a piece of that fish. It was so good. Thanks so much." But what are you guys talking about? It's like, "Oh, Bill and Debbie gave us some." So, you know, we had given out, we had hundreds of pounds of fish.
In one of your videos,
it was really cool.
You have bystanders here on the dock here. Bud and Mary's coming by, and you're putting big chunks of swordfish in their bags.
Yep,
yes.
So if you got lucky and caught us here on a good day, and it was up, the customers are spending the money to go fishing. So if they wanted the fish, you know, it's always, you know, our customers fish. But
also too, how can a customer take?
You couldn't take that much, exactly.
400 pounds.
Right.
Of
you catch a 300 or 400 pound swordfish, that's a ton of meat. So if you caught us on a good day and we're here and we had extra, you know, the last 4 or 5 years able to give some out, and that was really cool. But the big fish was neat. So we got the tail mold made of it. Bill kept the bill of it, you know, the actual bill. So that's cool. You can dry that out. It's a bone. And, you know, made a great video of it. And that video there was actually the video that kind of kickstarted my YouTube career. Those videos went semi-viral, you know, got 700,000-800,000 views. And
yeah, lots.
Kind of kicked it off. The only bad thing with a little bit of fame comes the negative side to it, you know, all the critics and the haters.
What did they say?
They said I shouldn't have caught the fish. Or kept the fish. They said I shouldn't have killed it.
Couldn't have killed it.
Yeah, they said a lot of rude and mean stuff to me. I don't want to say it on the podcast, but I'll tell you afterwards.
No.
And you started that YouTube channel for a little bit of fun and another source of income, possibly.
So I was
get off the water.
I was charter fishing. After college, I worked on 2 private boats for 2 wealthy families. Traveled, went to like the Bahamas, Bermuda, Mexico. A lot of blue marlin fishing. And then I would charter fish in between. You know, if I came back for a month or 2, I would do that and then go travel again. But I ran my own charter business for a long time, and I wanted to do something else. I had a degree from University of Miami, a video and film degree, and I always had that burning desire back in my mind that I wanted to have a fishing TV show. I didn't know about YouTube, you know, that people actually made a living doing it. And I had a friend growing up, Nick Blitz, you know, from high school, and we used to make little homemade fishing videos for a few years together. And he passed away. I was around 21 years old, and he passed away about 20 years old. So we used to call it the Nick Outdoor Show. And part of me always wanted to bring it back and do that because I kind of quit. When that happened, I kind of quit doing it and quit filming. So I went 6, 8, 10 years without filming anything. Then I started filming some of the fish we were catching, but I never edited it or put it anywhere. And then I had talked to Robert from Deer Meat for Dinner, who has a huge YouTube channel, and another kid named Franklin who had a big YouTube channel called Raw Fishing. And they said, Nick, like, we make a living doing this. And I didn't really believe them at first. I'm like, who makes a living? I didn't even know what YouTube really was. And I said I was going to start it. And you can say you're going to start anything in life, at a job or this or that. You actually have to go do it, though. So 6 or 8 months passed and felt like I got to make my first video. And I did that, and it was exciting. It was something new. It was a challenge for me. Could I start a new career path and be successful at it, And I think you pick these endeavors to go do. You want to see if you can succeed in it, whether it's fly fishing for tarpon or skiing or playing tennis or whatever it is. So for me, it was also a number of things. Childhood dream of having a fishing TV show, a potential new source of income, and something fun and something different. Right. I could get off the water a little bit and share my fishing adventures, with people all around the world. So,
have you cut back guiding because of that channel?
Did you get a little bit burned out, possibly?
Yeah, so I cut back guiding for I was getting a little burnt out for sure. I was fishing a lot. I got married. I have 2 kids now, 2 young daughters. So I had a number of things playing a role on that. I still wanted to make it, and I bought these expensive boats, which my dad thought I was crazy. I showed up here with this 37-foot Freeman with twin 350 Yamahas, which that was like bare minimum back then. The next one had 4 300 Yamahas, and then the next one was a 42-footer with 4 300 Yamahas. Now I got 2 42-footers here, and I thought I had the one sold. The guy backed out, so now I've got too many boats here I got to sell. But I got lucky. I got those boats at the right time. The used ones were very valuable. It was a 4 to 5 year wait to get one. So you could use a boat for 2-3 years and sell it and make money on it. So I got lucky with that. But I'd done some TV shows with George Poveromo, and he kind of was he was super nice. Tell me, Nick, this is what I do. How do I evolve my fishing career into something, the next level, Like, I wanted more. So, and I loved fishing back then, but if all you do is fish for a living and you enjoy it, that's great. But to live in the Keys is very expensive.
Yeah.
Homes, the boats, the cars, the trucks, having kids. So YouTube would open up the doors for me to work with other companies, sponsors, endorsements, product testing, and eventually build my own brand the last 3 years. So it was kind of
more time with family as well.
Exactly. So more time with family, so I could get off the water and I could work on these other projects at home.
How come you never got into marlin fishing? Marlin jump.
Swordfish jump too once in a while.
But not like a marlin, right?
I did a little bit of it in the Bahamas.
Maybe it's because they're not here.
We catch a few here, not many. And I think that's probably the main reason why. But we would go to the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos in the summertime, for 2, 3, 4 weeks. Sure. My uncle's boat and do it. There was a lot of screaming and yelling. But I just don't think we could target them here. And I did some on the private boats I worked on. St. Thomas, we'd go fish the moons and catch them. And the marlin fisher really evolved the last 15 or 20 years, with the circle hooks and dredges and all that. And it was happening back then. That was kind of the start of it, I would say, 15, 18 years ago. But just for us here with a swordfish, you could go out there. You could target a giant fish any given day. You could hook a big fish. You could gaff it and harpoon it, which is kind of this animalistic, takes us back to like outdoor style, like going hunting like that. And it's one thing to hook a big swordfish. It's another one to catch them and put them in the boat.
Right.
So the challenge is the boat handling. A swordfish, I mentioned earlier, they love charging the boat. They try to get in the wheels, the props. We've cut them off before. We've had them where they came off and you don't know they came off. They got chopped up by the propellers because they're trying to attack it. They've attacked submarines. They're very ornery fish. So a swordfish is a very unique fish.
It's in your backyard.
And it lives in our backyard. And any day I left the dock, I could hook a 500-pounder. And we lost so many big swordfish. It was very hard for us to catch the big ones.
Right.
Everyone's like, you've caught so many big swordfish. I've caught my fair amount of them. But Vic always used to say, I would trade, half the ones I've lost for every one I've caught. It took us so many years to get them dialed in and catch them. And the big ones were just good at getting away. And anytime you leave, though, you always have that shot of catching a big fish. So,
what do you think the big difference was from catching fish to catching a lot? What part of the methodology did you have to refine?
Probably there are a few things. The boat driving and handling, the speed of the boat over ground, how fast we move, hooking the fish, being patient, the length of the leader, and then rigging a bait. A big bait gets a lot of bites, but it's hard to catch them on it. And I do think there's times when we use those small, medium baits we use that a big fish doesn't eat it, but it'd be like, throwing a mullet to a 30-pound tarpon, he might try to eat it, but it's hard to hook him on it, you know, where
Right.
a pilcher, they could gobble it down. So it'd be a few things. So the baits, how we rig them, stitch them to the hook so they can't get the bait off the hook as easy. You could stitch a bait to a hook on there. We'd come back with floss sometimes. These fish would be hitting it, pulling on it. You'd come back with a hook with 2 feet of floss on it, and that thing was sewed on there like crazy and whatnot. But a number of reasons. So the patience hooking the fish, you know, is he on there, is he off there? You know, not doing it prematurely,
Right.
premature hook set, and the boat handling and driving too. You know, catching the fish. You know, giving you, if you're going to harvest the fish, giving the opportunity, you know, to gaff or land the fish and stuff like that. So
What's your biggest pet peeve on the boat with clients?
I can tell you if a mate can't tie a bowline, it really upsets me. You should be able to tie a bowline on a dock line, or if you got to tow somebody in. But I hate when people smoke cigarettes and I'm downwind of them and they smoke cigarettes in the face.
Yeah,
I got this whole boat.
too.
Can you go somewhere else and do it? So I don't smoke. So that'd be one of them. But no, I fished a lot of great people over the years. I had a lot of clients became friends. I've watched kids grow up. You know, some of my longest clients, I've seen these kids go from 8 or 10 years old up to 18, 20, 22, 24 years old, and see them go through college. So, and I have one family here that I fish with some of my best clients that are friends, and I talk to the father all the time. And he was my old mate from 12 years ago. He has his own boat here now, Matt, and he took the same people fishing, you know, in the year. They do a couple days with me, a couple days with him. And he's like, Nick, he's like, those kids told me like when our parents got divorced when we were, you know, 10 years older. So we look forward to coming down here every year so much. That's all we look forward to go fishing with you. So, you know, the fishing was the getaway for so many people, you know, whether it was away from family issues or work, you know, stress, and to get to share something that's so exciting, you know, fishing with people was a really great, you know, career for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't
So-
imagine the joy when somebody comes on your boat and they actually get a big one, or
Sure.
actually their first one.
Yep.
I would think that that's got to be a big part of it. You
Yep.
know, and also being able to refine, because you're catching that fish, you're putting the baits
Sure.
down there, you know where to be, and you know, so. But to find somebody that is just out of their mind and joy, like, oh my God, this is the dream come true. I
Coming
can
from
only
Italy.
imagine.
Sure. All
Yeah.
over. I got another good client from the UK, from England and stuff like that. And a lot of, he would fish out there all day for one bite. You know, if we caught it, it was great. And he had days, he caught 6 one day with my uncle and Scott. So we had that one epic day, and we've had days we've got 3 before, but you know, these people would save up all year to come here and go fishing for a couple of days. And the sorbs just, I became obsessed with swordfish. That became what we were after, what we were known for, my charter business and all that. And some people get the bug. Like if you had fished your whole life and you see a 400-pound swordfish, glowing blue, racing by the boat at 20 miles an hour, jumping and windshield wiping it with his bill there, and you're trying to gaff in our puma, it's exciting.
I
So,
can't even imagine.
it's
But I
cool.
can't. But I think I can't imagine one of the hardest things is keeping somebody engaged where you're
Sure.
not getting a bite, especially at night. You're
Sure.
watching a rod tip, and it's
Yeah.
like 5 hours later, and you're going
Yeah,
up and down.
three clients are sitting down and
and they're
you
bored and
get-
they're drinking, and like, fuck, is this really going to happen?
Yeah, what's the pressure like?
The pressure got extreme, very high. So social media, you know, I'd share all these catches on their Instagram and Facebook, and these accounts started getting bigger and bigger for me, and then YouTube eventually. And we go on these rolls, you know, you catch swordfish 10, 12, 14, 17 trips in a row, and people are expecting this big giant fish every trip, but that's not the case. You know, if I catch one in a day, I'm very happy. The pressure definitely caught up to me eventually one day and probably got me a little burnout. I think...
Do you remember that day specifically?
Nah,
Was it one day?
It wouldn't be one day. It'd be over time, you know. Some people having unrealistic expectations, you know. And I want everybody to have that great killer day, but a 200-pound swordfish, you might have to catch 30 or 40 a year to catch one that big, you know, which if you're averaging 1 or 2 swordfish per trip, that could be 10, 15, 20 trips a year to catch one like that. And that's how I tell people, a 300-pound swordfish we catch, you know, a couple a year.
And at $4,000 a day times 20,
Been expensive endeavor.
You got
Yeah.
you got $80,000 into that fish.
And I didn't used to be that much money. The boats didn't used to cost what they cost either. But I've only done a handful of charters that right now. But on the B&M back in the day, we were $1,500, but you'd burn $400 or $500 in fuel. Your tackle you could lose with $300 or $400. But I was making $400 or $500 a trip, 200 days a year. When you're making $80,000 a year and you're destroying your body, like working 12 to 14-hour days, and the days you weren't working, you're doing oil changes, working on boats, changing bilge pumps, working on tackle. but you really have to love it, to do that. And it's a great living. And I loved it for many years. I still love fishing. But I would have the kids, the family at home. That's a big, you can't be around your kids and be gone for 14 hours a day fishing. I would leave at 6 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, whatever it is, 6 in the morning, come home at 6 at night.
Or the next day after a 15-hour battle.
If you're there the next day. And then when I started doing YouTube about 5 or 6 years ago, whatever it was, 5 years, I wanted to succeed in that so bad, I would be on the computer editing for 2 or 3 hours a night. So I wasn't really there. I was present at home a few hours, but I was tied up and busy. So we have an editor now that helps us with the videos. And the last couple of years, when I had this bad operation about 19 months ago, it's awful, but the only good thing is I got to be around my kids the last 19 months. I've spent a lot of time at home, so got to see them a lot more.
Yeah. What's next for you? YouTube and pursuing that, but you have a pipe dream that's still out there?
Probably more traveling. I'd love to travel and film and document the adventures, and YouTube is a way to do that because there's a monetary, return on it. Work with these other companies and sponsors, but get to share those. I have people that stop by all the time. It's weird. I could tell Sarah, I'm going to the marina for 5 minutes. An hour later, yep, I know what happens. But people stop by here. They live vicariously through us, on your adventures. And it's really cool because I get to share that passion with people. And it was a great way to build a business. It brings a lot of people here fishing to the Keys. And I love taking the diehard fishermen. Like I have a guy named Mark Davis from California. He has the most billfish royal slams in the world.
He's a board member of the BTT. Or no, IGFA.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark
So
Davis.
I fished with him.
Yeah, I didn't realize.
Did he have a TV show?
No, there's a different Davis that has a TV
yeah.
show. So, but I love fishing with him because he would sit out there for 12 hours to watch for one swordfish bite. But he'd been to New Zealand and all around the world where you'd fish days for a bite or two. And the first time I fished him, I think we fished 2 days, and I felt bad because we lost a fish or two the first day, and the second day was rough. It was 6-footers, 7-footers, and we ran 40 miles at 13 knots, and we caught one the first drop, about 50 pounds. It's like, well, at least we got one in 2 days. But he was so happy and appreciative of it because he knew how much time and effort and money had put into this, And my trips back then were $1,500, a lot more affordable. But so whether it was him or taking another story that stands out, another fish, a young kid in a wheelchair, Logan Prickett. He was in a wheelchair with his mom, and he had some family and friends with him. He wanted to catch a swordfish. He had watched us on this TV show called Real Rivals, and we did a swordfish episode. And we go out there, and he just wanted to see a swordfish. And he could barely speak, but we caught a few mahi and a tuna or two on the way out. And he wanted to catch a swordfish. The first day, we had 2 bites all day. And we're using an electric reel. He's in a wheelchair, but he's watching the rod. He's on the reel. And we missed these 2 fish, and I felt defeated and bad. The next day, we go out, and it's still a little choppy, 2 to 4 footers. And Colby was the mate at the time. And that was the same Colby I talked about, the tarpon that jumped in the boat earlier. And I said, Logan, what do you want to catch? And his family's asking him, because we could maybe go catch 20 or 30 mahi, a lot more action instead of going swordfishing all day. And he whispers, swordfish. And we go out there, and the first 2 drops, boom, boom, 2 swordfish, like a 100-pounder, then a little 40-pounder. We keep one, we let one go, and ask him what he wants to do. And he goes, let's go catch other fish for his friends and family. So we went and caught some more mahi. And that was cool. And I don't remember every fish I caught, but certain fish, certain people and stories you remember. I'll take those stories to the grave, and as much enjoyment as that trip brought them, it brought me to sharing my experience, my passion with somebody else. Mm-hmm. And that's with charter fishing. You get to do that,
Sure.
Whether or not I catch the fish on the handle, it's a group effort. It's a group catch, It's the boat and the guides and all that stuff.
Do you ever fish with your dad anymore?
Not as much. So my dad and my brother, a little bit, but they have really bonded the last 10 or 12 years, which is really good because when I was young, I spent so much time with him, and
you were the favorite child.
I was the favorite and the golden child. Now the role has reversed. So the only bad thing is now that the business comes into the picture, he likes my brother more than me. But hopefully I'll do good enough on my own. I do YouTube and endorsements and charters and fishing schools, boat sales. I work for yacht brokerage. So I've taken on a number of things. And one day we will run the family business. But my dad's 78. He tells everybody we own it, but we don't run it or control it. He still does it.
Yeah.
A family business is tough no matter what it is, So hopefully I will be semi-retired in a few more years, and this will be the fallback plan. But my career will have been from my fishing, my swordfish camps and my boat sales and YouTube and other stuff. So
yeah, you got a great life ahead of you, buddy. Anything you want to add?
It goes by quick, just like when you're a young kid, you don't think about it. And now it's like when I tell these old fishing stories, I'm like, remember that one? That's like 10 or 12 years ago. But no, I mean, I love to fish, and I'm very blessed to get to live the life I have and to share it with people, have the family here that we got to fish together. And I think these next few years, my one daughter's almost 6. She's getting to that age where she can fish and hold the rod. So hopefully I can fish with my dad and her, my uncle, and my wife more. And the little girl, she's almost 3, and she's funny too. But hopefully we can get to do more fishing trips with the family. And I think, hopefully I'll get back into chartering more than I am right now currently, just when I get to feeling better. But, the YouTube thing, I can still go fishing, enjoy it for myself, and share it with other people. And, I hope that I can get other kids involved in fishing that as much enjoyment as it brought me, to share that. And it could be a snapper off of a bridge. You don't have to be a swordfish on a 42-foot Freeman. Someone could have the same experience, the same excitement by going to catch a snapper off a bridge or hooking it on and catching a barracuda, So I hope that I can share that and kind of give back a little bit that way and get more people involved in fishing because it brought me so much enjoyment.
Well, let's not forget about the Billfish Foundation and the influence you could give them.
Sure. No doubt.
He wants you in conservation.
I want you in conservation. Well,
it'll happen. Well, thanks so much, Nick.
Well, thank you.
It was
really
a pleasure.
appreciate it.
Really great visit.
Yeah, no, it's good to spend some time with you guys, and
Thank you so much.
hope you all enjoyed it.
Yeah,
That was great.
Awesome.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
When I saw it's but that story, when I saw it's just a ride.